kick it off just briefly before handing it over to Alexandra Satine, who's our partner with Founder Hour and our newly launched She's Independent Investments Fractional Executive Advisory and Board Placements Initiative. We're really excited to partner around this. We are a women first angel group, which means we are really leaning into women owned and not only investing, but saying, how do we help these businesses? What can we do? And by the way, sometimes investing in teams that are lacking some diversity or, representation at the top and on the board. We're really excited about this initiative of being able to plug into these businesses and add value. We've invited founders here today. We have a founder ecosystem that we may invest in or, plug into otherwise. But the Founder Hour is really just a time to highlight some of our C-suite skilled, members who invest with us, and really excited to hear from both Lisa and Sophie today. So with that, I am going to make you, Alex, the ability to share your screen, and you'll just have to keep admitting people as they join us. But it is ready to go.
Perfect. I am going to share my screen and let me know if you can see it. Just want to make sure. Perfect. You guys see that?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'll kick it off. Oh, let me admit someone, and I'll start with a brief intro, and then I'll introduce our great panelists today. My name is Alexandra Satine. I am the co-founder of Your Cohort, and I am actually a fractional COO and CFO for early stage startups. I was a founder myself, and about 2 years ago, I co-founded this business where we really provide fractional resources to founders, and we're pretty much industry agnostic. So that's a little bit about myself, and I'll be leading the panel. And with that said, I want to introduce you to Sophie. You can kick it off.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sophie Vu. I joined She's Independent this year. So I'm, as a woman entrepreneur and founder and executive, I obviously want to support other women and minority groups to build very mission-driven, socially impactful companies. I was born and raised in San Francisco, so I've been in the tech industry my entire career. So 25 years, if you will, as I would like to call myself a startup junkie. So I've been with very early stage emerging tech companies, everything from Google to the latest AI company helping with language translation. And not only a startup junkie, but also specializing in marketing, brand, category creation, or disruption, having done that 4 times with 4 different types of categories. And now I'm also a founder too. So I'm building my own software company with a technical co-founder who's a chief product officer. So obviously I want to learn from Lisa as well during this very serendipitous session.
Thank you so much. Lisa?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Lisa Schneider. I also joined Independent this year. Was very lucky to be introduced to Natalie. Felt like I met a kindred spirit. Was very similarly, I'm sure we all feel this way, right? Like very mission aligned, and was excited both to be able to participate as an investor, but also participate as somebody that does provide fractional chief product officer work, consulting, coaching, advisory, general guidance, depending on what folks need, to startups. Have also been doing product development for about 20 years. And before that, I started my career in marketing before I pivoted over to product. And so I always feel like that product marketing connection is, or at least should be, a lot closer than it is. And I talk a lot about cross-functional alignment and how to get that foundational work done. So that I think that aligns really nicely with some of the questions that Alex had teed up for today, but really making sure that you have the right foundational work, and B, a real outcome-driven practice and not an output-driven practice. And so I'm excited to be here and share and learn.
Thank you so much. And just thank you to all the founders who joined. We really want to make this a conversation. So if you have questions and you want to ask, don't wait until the end. You don't have to. Again, this is more like an opportunity for you to ask us, get guidance, get support. And then also feel free towards the end, if there's any other topics that you find really important, that you would like us to bring industry experts, feel free to share them, whether it's through the chat or email us later on with those ideas, so we can make sure we're taking your needs into consideration as we're putting a few of these opportunities together. So with that said, today's session is all about growth and how to drive that growth. And I'll kick it up with our first question. And the question that I wanted to kick it up with, maybe Sophie, you can guide us through this. As early stage founders, how do you properly, or how do you most efficiently budget for a marketing budget, knowing that, you know, funds or capital is limited?
Sure. So I kind of grapple with this question a lot because it depends on how you define early stage. Because early stage could be pre-seed, seed, series A, B, C, D, right? And technically you're a startup. I've been in that space for a while. And so, you know, depending on which stage you're at and what your goals and objectives are, it varies, right? But if I were to give a number, you know, like that I've seen average, especially as I've been at companies at Series A and beyond, it's around 10 to 20% of your budget, right? And that could be, you know, used in various channels and testing and experiments, but also in different time waves, right? So you don't have to spread it out over a year. I've done plans where, you know what, I really had an objective to like sign up a beta launch, right? Then I spent a lot of my budget up front and then kind of dwindled it out for the rest of the year. So if I were to straight up answer that question, it'd be 10 to 20%. But again, if we're saying early stage, like I'm at pre-seed, I'm not spending anything on marketing right now. I'm doing it through networking, through, you know, hosting and joining community networks. I'm not spending, you know, on targeted ads or paid or social media yet. So again, it depends on how you define early stage, but ultimately what your goals and objectives are, and then the plan and milestones that you want to reach. But if I had to give a flat out number or range, it'd be 10 to 20%.
Got it. Lisa, any thoughts on this particular?
Yeah, I mean, what I'll add to what Sophie said is sort of the smaller the tests that you can do and the more tests that you can do with the budget that you have. And I'm talking literally like sometimes hundreds of dollars, because what you just want to find out is what kind of messaging is getting traction, what kind of channels are getting traction. There's a good book called Call Traction, actually, that I would recommend that talks about, they call it this bullseye approach, but basically you're going to make a matrix, like all the places that you think that you can reach your target audience. And you want to do as much testing as you can, because if something's working, right, then you're really validated to put more money behind it. What you don't want to do is attach to an idea of like, oh, I think I'm going to get people here. I think I'm going to get people like this, and put a lot of money behind that before you really start learning around that. I will also say, depending on the space that you're in, I don't know if everybody knows, there's a tool called SparkToro. It's only a couple of years old. It was founded by Rand Fishkin, who founded Moz, if anybody's familiar with SEO. And that's a really good place too, to identify where you can reach people with certain characteristics or certain interests.
That's actually really interesting. Oh, you put it on there. Oh, great. Thank you, Natalie.
Yeah.
Anybody who's interested. And also the book, if you want to share the book on the chat so everybody can capture, that would be great. So with that said, I'll segue into the next part is, how do you, now we're saying, okay, budget your marketing budget in a more, let's just say, conservative way. If you're pre-seed, maybe not even put that marketing dollars against those. But how would you, a lot of the conversations that happen with investors when you're raising capital, or even once you raise capital, is your cost of acquisition of a customer. And obviously, if nobody knows your brand, you're starting at a higher rate. Like, how do you manage that? How do you project that? And how would you, in the first year, try to keep that so that it's not eating up a big percentage of the capital? And I don't know, Sophie, if you want to.
Well, I probably want to defer to Lisa because I always start with the product.
Yeah.
Right. So the product has to be amazing. The product has to be frictionless. The onboarding process, you need to know who your ideal customer is, right? You don't want to be chasing.
Right.
The reason why customer acquisition costs get out of hand is because you're chasing everyone and everything, and you're not sure where your value prop is, right?
So
And
that's,
yeah,
yeah, I would say, well, I was going to say that's one. And then the other one is a really common thing is that in early stages, it can be really hard. Like I'm talking about like emotionally hard, right? It's easy on paper, but emotionally hard to focus on really one core audience. And so like I'm working now with a pre-launch fintech startup, and they started out with this sort of huge audience, and they had this, you know, mock up for a landing page that had like 3 different life stages. And I was like, no, absolutely not. Right. We cannot do, like, one day, this is who you can be. But right now, this is not who you can be. So first of all, are you building a product for like a really clear audience to do a really clear thing for them? Right. That's number one when you say, Sophie, start with the product. Right. But the other thing is, you know, do you have sort of a longer term plan? And so I don't like these metrics in a vacuum. So I don't like this idea of like, you know, even if it's like, you know, customer acquisition cost, whatever it is. I hate saying CAC. Am I like the only one that hates saying that? It's like a little. Right?
That's why I was saying the whole word.
Yeah. Anyway, you know, if you look at that in a vacuum, it doesn't tell me a lot, right? It can tell me maybe how I'm doing compared to competitors if I have their data, or, you know, or if the investors know something about the market. But really, how does that fit into my larger budget? And how is that planful? What is my lifetime value of the customer, right? What is my price of the product? And you know, there was a phase which clearly, thank God, is over, because I thought it was really bad when it happened. But, you know, going back like 5 or 7 years ago, right, there was this whole phase of like, we're going to throw a lot of money, we're going to throw a lot of investment, get the customers, we'll figure out what to do with them later. Right. And so that was like Blue Apron and Casper, and they were all like getting like big audience numbers, but they were hemorrhaging money. So I don't care what their CAC was, but they were hemorrhaging money. So you want to make sure that you've got a plan, and that you're looking at those metrics sort of as you go, right? Do you get people in but have high churn? Do people drop off at the top of the funnel? Like, you need to be figuring out your overall environment and not just focusing on the one number. But in terms of getting it down, it does go back to testing those different channels, right? And what's performing well. But make sure that you're looking at things in context and that you have a plan.
Definitely. Any questions from the founders? Any challenges that you're faced and that you would love to get some thoughts from Lisa or Sophie? I know this is a big one because I always work on it, on financial models. No? Okay.
I guess I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
I think one of the things that we're like adjusting to rapidly, I guess is a nice way to put it, is pricing. So, and we're struggling with like trying to maintain the margins that are like in our plan, you know, which we haven't really tested all the way yet, versus like just getting customers in to try the product, because we do think once they use it, you know, they'll come back. And so that's something that like we've had a lot of debate about, and I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
So, I mean, I would love a little bit a context of your monetization business model, right? So when you say pricing, is it a one-time fee? Is it a recurring? Is it, you know, what? I mean, I think there's a lot of dynamics that are involved with that question. So I would maybe a little bit more, yeah.
I was trying to keep it as general as possible, but
Yeah.
it's a subscription model that it's a subscription model with about a 50% margin. And it seems like I could get a lot of traction at cost. And because a lot of the pushback that I'm getting from users, and it's a B2B subscription. So a lot of the pushback I'm getting is that, well, you're unproven, so I don't know if it's going to work. So I'm hesitating to put it's a marketing service as well. I'm hesitating to put marketing budget towards you because I don't know if it's going to work. So I'm trying to decide if I should just sort of stick with because the ROI on it when it does work is like through the roof. And so that it's hard for me to have to say that like, we should be cutting it because I think the value is there. But given that I'm unproven, I'm wondering how much flexibility I should be willing to extend. Does that make more sense?
That it does. And thank you for that. I think I'm going to stop you when you said you think there's the value. I would like to know whether your customers or people that are actually paying agree with you on that. Right. And so it's one thing, I mean, obviously we all think our babies are pretty and cute and we're adding a lot of value, but then you actually have paying customers, right? It sounds like.
I do.
And so I would tap into that more and understand what do they value and what they're paying, and what if you want to raise the prices or increase your margin, then I would lean into like, what are those tangible things that they see that is a value and worth paying for versus
The ones that are paying love it. It's the new customers trying to get new people on board, where the early adopters were in and like bought in at that original pricing, but I'm having a little bit of trouble finding more like them. And so as I've expanded beyond, I'm just getting like a lot of pushback on pricing based on my unproven status for them. It's unproven to them. You know, I can highlight all kinds of things and tell and give case studies and that kind of thing. But so should I just let them trial it? I guess that's a piece of it.
So, just to piggyback on what Sophie said, because that is a very true point. If you already have this core audience who really likes the product, making sure that you're understanding what they like about the product so that you can design the targeting of your next audience and because they'll have those same points in common. That value add is what the other person is saying. So making sure your marketing strategy is aligned with those values that those existing customers are finding in your product. And in my opinion, sometimes it's not about lowering the price. A lot of people gravitate to lowering the price first versus finding you're really understanding who your audience is and who's that person who's really gonna buy into it. And that's the tricky part to what Lisa said. It's really identifying that target audience, which a lot of the times you might think is one, but it turns out that it's a completely other one. And how do you speak to that target audience? And I don't know if Lisa or Sophie, you sort of want to jump in or think of anything else around those.
Yeah, I no, those are all good. I agree about the target audience, right? Just because somebody sort of might fall into a bucket that in theory could use this product doesn't mean that it's narrow enough. And so what is the through line between those people that were those early adopters, very passionate, jumped on board, and then what are they willing to share, right? Are you able to put as part of your marketing and onboarding some, case studies or sample results, obviously, right, anonymized and all of that, but sort of, right, you can't literally guarantee somebody's marketing results, but can you provide a little bit more social proof around that, particularly if you're very new?
Perfect. Thank you. That makes a ton of sense. And it's kind of what I needed to hear, what I wanted to hear. So thank you.
Okay, good. Any other questions around this? I know that this is a big one that a lot of people tend to have questions around. No?
And maybe just one little thing I've learned over the years from experience is that pricing is a positioning element of your brand and what you offer, right? And you said marketing services. And so that sounds to me like, is that the type of client you want who may or may not see the value in what you offer, and it might not be a great client to have. So I think, pricing, if you truly believe in the value and you have, it's not, you say you haven't proven it, but you said you have clients that love you and love what your product does, then that in a way is a filter and a qualification component to your work and the brand and services that you offer. So you also want successful clients too. You don't just want clients and then not have that be a good experience with your brand.
Thank
Now-
you.
Natalie, you had something which I thought was interesting too. If you're gonna do a
Oh, yeah.
trial,
Yeah.
Basically, I don't like free just to be free. So just making sure that you have a plan there, but so many thoughts on pricing, so many thoughts on, monetizing, but people who are paying, and by the way, not everybody's a good customer. Like,
Yep.
what is your actual, customer where it's not, they're asking you all the questions or they're not happy. Who are the happy customers? Learn from them and have conversations. And by the way, if everyone's signing up, you're not pricing it, high enough. So there's a lot to play around with, I think.
Yeah, I dropped a book recommendation also in the chat. So definitely take a look at that. That's got like a lot in that book.
thank you so much. So I'll then segue into the next one, which is actually, I think, a one that everybody has challenges, whether they're early stage or not early stage. How do you come up with the right metrics to see customer adoption, customer usage? Like, what are the right metrics in a growth to measure your growth, right? Other than revenue, that you would recommend for founders to think through when they're figuring out their KPIs or their OKRs?
Okay, so I always go back to sort of strategy, right? And there's this strategy pyramid. I didn't make it up, but I use it a lot in workshops, and I tell a stupid story about a trip to California. But that, you're starting with mission, right? Like why we're doing this, and you have a vision where we're going to end up. And you have objectives, which is like, how are we going to know that we're there, right? How are we measuring this? And that is going to be money, but what is it besides money, right? As Alexandra said, what is it besides money? Are you trying to change something? Are you trying to get a certain number of people? Are you trying to get a % of the market? Are you trying to disrupt a system or trying to create a category? Like what are your objectives? And then you figure out your strategies to get to all of those things. And so based on all of that, right, that goes back to that like outcome driven practice. Okay, I know I need to get here. So the metrics are not like everything you can measure, because that's a distraction and just go down the rabbit hole, right? What metrics will, based on this outcome, will I know that I am tracking to here? And what do I need to know that I can act on, right? That I can change. So, it might be that you're looking at your onboarding funnel and looking at conversion and drop off. It might be that you're looking at retention, right? There are a lot of things that you can look at, but you also want to know what not to look at. So I'll give a quick story, which is I was working at a social enterprise startup in the housing space, and the focus was on what we called home buyer education. So you're going to go in, especially if you're like a first generation home buyer, you don't know, this is like a huge expense, probably the most amount of money you're ever going to spend on any one thing in your life. And there's huge information asymmetry. And so our goal was to help correct that information asymmetry with home buyer education. And I'm talking to Rocket Mortgage, and like they get what they want. Okay, I just want to say Rocket Mortgage gets what they want. And Rocket Mortgage wanted to partner with us, which was amazing. And they did. We got that business, but they wanted to pay us on course completions. And I was like, no. And that was like really scary because, Rocket Mortgage gets what they want. But why? Because course completions did not align with our mission for two reasons. One is you can get in, get educated, and realize, oh, I should wait a year. And so I don't finish the course because the course takes you all the way through what you need for closing. I don't need to read that now, right? If I go through the first half of the course and I'm like, oh, you know what? I should wait a year, or I should look in another place, right? Then we've met our mission because you learned something that helped you make a good financial decision. And second of all, the path was very long because, again, right, if you think about, I don't know if anybody here is like in ed tech or has looked at some of these things, but this idea of just-in-time learning, right? If I read about closing now and I'm not closing for 6 months, I guarantee you I forgot it, right? So we don't expect people to finish. And as a product person, I do not want to push users to finish knowing that that's not good for them, because if they read closing now and finish and Rocket pays me, but then they're closing in 6 months and they forgot it, that's not helpful to them. So you have to think about, right, that was a metric that I was not willing to say course completion is a marker of success. So it seemed really like an easy, obvious metric to drive to, but it actually wasn't. So you have to, I know all these depends answers are so annoying, but they're also really true, right? What aligns with your entire product strategy and what is information that you can act on to make a difference? That's how you figure out your metrics, right? So without a specific example, that's sort of where I would go.
Sophie, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. It's so easy to speak about generalization, and over the years, you know, depending on what teams and what motivators, and especially if you're working cross collaboratively, the metrics change in every different direction. But I just think you have to be honest with yourself. Like, you know, don't just track metrics for the sake of tracking metrics, but you know which metric matters. Don't be afraid. And it's okay to have, you know, I mean, you know, especially when, as an executive, I've always been like, you always want to show good news, but you have to be honest and trustworthy and authentic about showing bad news. And those are the metrics that matter, the ones that show you the bad news or the not the positive news, right? And so how do you can dig in to then improve? So I don't have other things like, oh, this is the one metric, there's no silver bullet. It's really about being honest with yourself and with others about the metrics that ultimately matter. And that could be different depending on the goals and objectives and the timing and the initiative. Certain metrics matter at different times.
Well, we have definitely a few questions. Professor Eleanor.
Thank you for having me. This has been very, very helpful. The book recommendations in particular. So my name is Eleanor Brown and my company is called Diversity Board. And we are a platform for technical and tech adjacent talent, Black diaspora talent from the Caribbean and West Africa. And we've grown really fast. We're just coming out of Techstars. We have 60,000 people. I find that when I'm talking to people, the only metric that they are interested in is revenue. I mean, that has been a theme again and again and again and again. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I don't know if it's me or our business but that's the only thing people are interested in. Even though we're growing really fast and we have this really large pool of, you know, very well-educated, university educated Black diaspora people, they're really only interested in revenue. I just forgive me for saying that. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah. When you say people, do you mean investors? Potential investors?
Well, we have not really been raising because we're very frugal and we have utilized the money we got from Techstars really well.
Good for you.
So I guess we have not met with that many investors, but I would say, you know, like we just got a Google grant. Google has a program for Black founders, and it wasn't, I mean, it's not investment, it's a grant. And everybody at every juncture, all they're asking about is revenue.
So I would make a distinction. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that has been my experience. I don't know if I'm atypical, but.
No, I think you're not atypical, but what I would do is maybe make a distinction between who needs to know what and when and why. So, right, Google, however you are outside of your company, whether it's potential investors, you know, partners, right, grants, they are going to want to know about the money. So they care about the bottom line. But internally, how do you know between here and there what metrics do you need to understand that are going to get you there, that are either, you know, leading indicators, right? You want to make sure also that your like key metrics are not lag indicators, because then you could be a little bit too late. So, you know, what can you kind of get ahead of in a way? And again, what are things that if you know this, you can make a change for the positive for the business. Right? They might not care about that, but you need to care about that. So the metrics that you need to know internally, right, as your KPIs is one thing. And then what you need to show outside of your company might look a little bit different, because you're right, they might not care how you get there. They're just caring that you're getting there.
Yes. Thank you. I appreciate it. Very helpful. Thanks so much.
And the one other thing I just add is when obviously everyone cares about revenue, but if you're pre-revenue, obviously you have great traction, you have, like you said, users and so forth, that's great, is that they really want to understand potentially your business model and your monetization model, right? So you may be pre-revenue, but you're very clear in your head as to how you would generate that revenue when you're ready or when you're mature enough. So instead of focusing on that you don't have revenue, like what is your path to revenue?
Right. Thank you very much. Very helpful.
Thank you. Natalie, I know you had your hand up.
Oh yeah, I'll ask a quick one. I think great points, coming from both Lisa and Sophie, and, knowing stage of business is going to also tell you maybe how meticulous or how much you want to be, testing and watching. I mean, I'm an engineer by background. I know that without the data, it's hard to make, informed and smart decisions. But I think because I'm an engineer, sometimes I'm a little more data driven than I should be, meaning you also don't want to be, running kind of crazy reporting of all this data if it's too much. And if it's not, I guess what I'm trying to kind of get to is, how do you find that balance of, it's the right dashboarding, it's the right data, it's, am I going to over index and get maybe a little bit more data and then say, oh, this is what I actually need and what's sustainable? Because if you're trying to get too much, it's hard to get it ongoing. And is it maybe just building, I don't know, some of the automation or some of the, some more efficiencies so that it doesn't have to be somebody's job every week or every other week to be, compiling this stuff. So I guess it's a little bit of a general question, but it's yeah, how are you coming up with those metrics? Recognizing there's so many, right? It could be revenues, it could be, I don't know, a landing page and A/B testing of what's going to drive conversion. There's so many things you'd be looking at. Sales team, who's converting what? I mean, there's so many metrics and dashboards we could be talking about. So how do you think about this? It's a big question, sorry.
Lisa, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I want to try not to repeat myself from earlier, because I feel right, it is that, okay, so if we're sort of aligning with the key outcomes and we've determined what those, you can know everything. But this is where also I'll say it's really hard. What I'll say is this is a really hard thing to answer in theory, but it's a really good question to raise and be aware of, because there is some art to it. And it's interesting. You're like, oh, I'm an engineer, I'm looking at the data right now. Now you're leading investments, you're really a numbers person, and that's really important. But I know last week, one of my sort of fellow product executives posted something about, how much is data / science and how much is art when you're talking about product management. And most of the people I was a little surprised and mostly happy were really leaning on the art side, meaning this idea that we want to be data informed, right? And so data driven, sort of being persnickety about the language. And I was an English major and I ran Merriam-Webster for 6 years. So that's sort of up my alley. But I think it's that difference, right, between data driven versus data informed. And again, understanding, right, what is the most important thing for me to do now? How have I prioritized my objectives? So that prioritization task is really important, because if your objective is getting new customers, that's going to look one way, right? That might be that landing page A/B testing. It might be channel testing, right? What are those metrics? If you're looking and, sort of at your churn and you're saying, or your business model, and you're saying it's really important to keep people or to give them new features, that's a different set of metrics. And so you want to be looking at the metrics that are relevant to your key objectives at this time. And so as Sophie said, that might change over time, right? What I'm focused on this quarter, if I get a handle on that, I might focus on something else next quarter.
And is it fair to say also, you're a lean, earlier stage business, you're probably going to have a focus that maybe is this project and that project. But if you're more mature and established, maybe you have these metrics across the board, right? Because you have more resourcing to support.
Yes. And so there's different prioritization frameworks for different stages, right? So early on, it might just be really obvious, or you might use a simple framework like ICE or RICE or sort of one of those. I know I'm throwing out acronyms, and if you're not familiar, we can do another office hours on prioritization. But if you're further along to the point where you really have a product portfolio, right, that's a whole different kind of product management role, this idea of responsive portfolio management, and where are you resourcing sort of to different things, and how are you divvying up those resources among different products and different objectives?
Great. And I guess one other thing I'll say to Professor Eleanor, wherever you went, I see you're still on. As an investor, we of course care about your revenue numbers. We also care about traction or engagement with, you know, customers and prospects. And so there's a lot more we care about. So just a quick note. Thank you so much.
Great.
The only thing I would add about the whole data and the art is, so I used to also own revenue operations. So that means that was not just sales operations, marketing operations, and customer service and customer success. I look at metrics as kind of twofold. One is obviously the top line, right? If you're trying to hit your metrics for the board, for the company performance, and so forth. The other way I use metrics is to help influence and change behavior, right, in people. So if you're, besides yourself as a founder, but maybe people that you're working with, what are the metrics that it will enable them to change their behavior or keep their behavior and their what they're doing on track, right? Because people are guided by certain metrics and numbers. It might not be a high level metric because again, they're an individual contributor, but I use metrics in a way that speaks to the role and the objectives of that function. And then it also aligns to the greater objective of your company performance. So if you think about which metric matters to whom, when, that is how I think how metrics can be powerfully used. It shouldn't just be one number. It needs to be broken down based on the objectives and functions and then the day-to-day, right? Somebody might care about daily website traffic, but as a C-level executive, I don't care. I'm looking at, you know, profit and loss and ratios. So
I love that. And it also reminds me of my sales days of sometimes the data metrics are literally driving people to do more, right? And so there's all different types of,
or less.
profiles or less, right? But all different types of profiles and people that may need to see different things, you know, in their roles. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, it gives people like motivation, authority, autonomy. So I agree. I think that's great for leadership. And you just reminded me, sorry, Alex, to stay on this, but one other thing to be careful of is that you're not giving two people on your team conflicting outcomes and metrics, because a lot of times there are certain things that are always going to be in tension or in balance. And that's fine, right? So acquisition and retention there might be some balance there. Now, some of that's healthy, but if somebody's got a goal to just get like a ton of acquisition, they don't care what happens afterwards, right? They might get people that are not good matches, that are gonna churn, whatever it is. And then you've got somebody else that has a retention goal, and those two, right? There's nobody at the top kind of saying, okay, here's the alignment, right? Here's where we're going after. Again, here's that strategy that we're all aligned on. You can really create inadvertently some frustration and tension between people or departments on your team. So again, I know we're probably focused on pretty early stages here, but just one other thing to think about as a leader when you're looking at what metrics you're assigning to whom.
No, thank you. Any questions from our founders based on all this incredible knowledge share? No? Okay, I'll just add one thing and then go on to the next one. Is if for very early stage startups, I also say go back to your financial model. And that can be a great place to start figure out what those key metrics that you want to measure, because your financial model is where is the roadmap to your business, especially early on. So what was your churn projection? What was your customer acquisition projection? How are you going to get there? So I always say go back to that. Financial models shouldn't be abandoned after you've raised the capital. Instead, you should definitely update them, keep them really relevant, because they're going to be very helpful as you're building the first few years of your business. Not to say later on you should abandon them, but especially the first few years, don't just abandon them after you fundraise. So that's a great question. Oh, we have a question, Elizabeth.
Hi, yeah, I actually had a follow-up question about metrics and specifically engagement and sort of the tension between recognizable KPIs that like people in the world love versus the KPIs or the metrics that are really powerful for your audience. So just 2 seconds of context. I have a relationship romance app. So it is consumer mobile, it's couples getting together and like having a delicious time together. So DAU is like the standard, everybody loves it. But I've found that people like to sext on Tuesdays and not on Saturdays, right? So we are a weekly app. And so how do you balance the tension between what the world recognizes as like the best consumer mobile metrics versus the metrics that might be the most representative of you and your user base?
That's actually a great question. Who wants to kick it off? Sophie, Lisa?
I mean, I'm trying to dissect. I'm never someone that says I want to conform to what somebody else wants. It depends on what they're looking for and what I mean, again, every app, every solution is different, and daily active users might not fit like enterprise companies, for example. Like we don't track daily active users, right? And so I'm trying to understand, you know, if that person's asking, you know, or resetting the context, right? What, you know, this is a tool that is not meant to be a daily usage type of tool. And so maybe it's weekly, is that, if that's how you're measuring it? And I would change the acronym to weekly active users to monthly active users, right? I mean, that's a simple answer, but I feel like maybe you're asking a different question, maybe underlying the strategy about, you know, is it whether the product and traction and the strategy is where you want to get it to be and how you want to improve it. But I wouldn't just conform to any metric, because it's like not every metric is the same for every solution. So, but I need
This
it.
is I've seen this too. No, I was going to say, right. I've seen this too. And I've had places where I've been asked for a particular metric and I'm like, well, but you know, that's not the metric that's relevant here, but because look, people are used to it. And so I would say 2 things. One is I agree with Sophie, if that seems to be sort of the right metric for you, right? Absent is that where you want it to be? Then, but I want to move away from metrics for a second. I want to talk about storytelling.
Mhm.
Okay, your job as a founder is to create and own a narrative and to tell the story so that there's some context around why you're looking at weekly active users, right? What does this look like for these couples, and you know, what's important and what are you seeing, and like tell the story of how this works and how this solves the problem, and then connect that to the metrics that show that you're doing this in a successful way. So it's not just, oh, someone asked for daily active users. Yes, they're gonna, because you're right, that's what they're used to. But it doesn't mean that's what they have to know and that you can't change the narrative. But I think you want to think about what is that surround sound around when you tell them, actually, you know, here, this is the story and this is the number that we're looking at.
Mhm.
That's awesome. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Well, so actually, this is a great segue to the next question I was going to say. How does marketing and product work together to create retention? And what helps in that relationship between those two, say, teams or departments for the retention to be there? Because ultimately getting users, I guess if you want to say, it's a lot easier than getting retention. So how can both teams collaborate and work together to really drive that retention? And what should founders think about when they partner with those 2 resources?
Well, I mean, as a founder, you are the product and marketing team. So I just have to align with myself and maybe another person, my co-founder. But I always think about, you know, and when I think about product and marketing for a little bit later stage company, I think of product-led growth, right? I think about the product being that entity that helps both marketing and product people understand what the customer needs are and what they value. right? And so I think I start with that as being that communication and alignment and that rules of engagement as to what does the product do and how does the customer engage with that product. And so that's that life cycle, that flywheel between product and marketing needs to be a continuous loop of conversation, right? So, you know, like I forget, it's not about just getting a bunch of users, right? Like what are the type of targeted users and audience that are going to enjoy the product and that will then advocate for the product and then bring in more users and advocacy, right? So how, as a marketer, I've always made sure that, you know, I don't just get people in the door. I also look about how they use the product. What is that level of engagement? Is there any churn? Why are they not renewing, or why are they renewing? And then be able to then learn from that and then use that content to then build and craft my messaging and my positioning and my story, my narrative, to then bring further ideal clients into the cycle, right? And so at a very simple, high level, it needs to be an ongoing flywheel and conversation between marketing and product. Because again, you don't want to just, you know, waste money on acquiring customers that may not align and value your product. And the product people need to understand that, hey, we got to listen to customers. We got to, you know, double down on the areas that are bringing value and maybe test, you know, 20% of that on new features and products that that can then bring in and broaden that customer base. So at a high level, I think it's having that partnership and that communication and understanding that it's not a one-sided function, right? As a CMO, I was never thought of myself as just the marketing officer. I was also the product person, the customer success person, the salesperson. I don't know if that
That's
launches, but Lisa probably might have a more detailed scenario.
Well, I mean, I just more of the same, honestly. Everything you said is exactly right in my mind as well. And I think that, again, that goes back to, right, what are those shared strategies and values? How are we, I like that flywheel idea and this idea of, you know, we're doing some research in product, we're doing some research in marketing. Are we sharing those learnings, and are we aligning on what the through lines are for those learnings and how we're both collaborating, both to sort of build, position, and sell the same thing? So, you know, both ways. And so Sophie's talking as a marketer, and I'll say as a product person, I'm never going to lay out a plan to build something and start building it without bringing in other stakeholders, right? It's not about sort of my vision or what I see or the founder vision. It's like, okay, well, what are we seeing in the market and what are we learning and sort of what other metrics? And, you know, marketing, as you mentioned, sometimes a lot of times encompasses like customer success. I mean, they know stuff. Let me tell you, those people know things. And so, right, just making sure that there should be sort of regular cross-functional meetings where they're aligning. And if something, you know, looks like it's going in a different direction, right? Again, we want to know ahead of time, like, oh, you know, your numbers or your responses look a little different from what we expected, or we're building this thing, but you're finding this other message resonating. Do we have to pivot? So I can just only stress that, you know, from, again, right in the very early stage, there might only anyway be, you know, 1 to 3 people. And so that's really easy. But as you grow, really think about, as leaders, just making sure that you understand that there's no stakeholder volleyball, right? Stakeholder volleyball is like, I did a thing, now here you deal with like the other side of it. So stakeholder volleyball is not a fun game. You don't play that.
Great. Just because we are almost at the end, I want to see any founders have any questions that maybe we didn't touch on, but you wanted to get advice from Lisa or Sophie. Pretty much we're open to listening to your questions or any help that you might need. No? Okay, so I'll ask, Lisa.
Hi everyone. I'm a new face to this group. So thanks for having me. I own a company called Lyons Leather Co. and I'm based here in Lyons, Colorado. We're a product company. I come from a SaaS background and wanted nothing to do with it anymore. And so we make like tangible things, and it's a simpler solve in a lot of ways. But I know this conversation has been kind of a lot about like SaaS workflows. The company's 11 months old. I'm the only employee, as the owner. I design everything. I have a marketing background, so I've been doing all the marketing myself, and we're doing really well, like $130,000 in sales in 10 months. And I just started doing it full time like 3 weeks ago. So it's like all really good things. But I'm at this point now where I'm like, should I hire help? And like, is that an agency? Agencies are expensive. I've been burned by them many times. I've interviewed about 13 of them over the past couple of weeks, and I found one that I really like, but of course it's expensive. And I'm having this philosophical conversation about marketing, which is like, do I teach myself to fish, meaning navigate Facebook ads and Google ads, get really savage at them, or do I actually ask for help and like to a certain point have it all set up, do the testing, and then take it from there? So and then like, again, trying to like have a life and a family and like, so understanding my own boundaries and what I should outsource, what I can outsource, and like what I should really just buckle down and watch like 1,000 YouTube videos on. I think that's
Answering your own question, which is yes, you should probably outsource it.
Yeah. Okay. Because I was actually leaning towards the opposite.
No, I mean, that's based on what you're hearing and what you're describing, I can see you're talking yourself into like, I need to delegate, and I am a team of one. And I think where I gravitate towards, whereas ultimately the underlying question, which is like, who do I trust? Right. And, and maybe you don't know what that is. I mean, we're all learning, right? There's things, and I'm never going to be an expert at legal, finance, but I have to figure out how to build trust and delegate and have someone do those things. Because again, I'm not going to have time to watch 1,000 YouTube videos. And I don't know if that's the best use of your time. So I would probably look for people who you trust and get those referrals as a starting point. That's how I operate. I start with the foundation of trust, of who I trust, and then start to network and understand like, hey, do you recommend this agency? Is that a good referral? Versus going out blind. And I've been burnt, as you said, as well. So
okay.
And those platforms are tricky. I just want to say those platforms are really tricky. So, for example, if you're trying to do Google ads, right, they're going to make a lot of recommendations that may not actually be good for you. They're good for Google. They're not necessarily good for you. So I do think it's important. Can I ask you a question? Like, what's expensive? And I'm asking because there are agencies that really focus on doing like quicker, less expensive tests for startups. Because again, right, if you find something that works, right, and you're like, oh, hey, we're running this thing, I got a 70% ROI, you're good. Like, you don't care how much it costs, right? If you're making money on that effort, the question is, what is it going to take you to get to where you figure that out?
Right. And so I'm entirely self-funded and open to the whole angel investor. I just really haven't crossed that bridge and haven't no bank loans or anything. So most of the agencies that I've talked to are $5,000 a month, and then they recommend like a minimum $4,000 a month ad spend. And a lot of them require you to do like a 3-month or a 6-month contract. So, that's potentially, it's a lot of money, especially since it's coming from my savings.
Yeah.
And so it's like kind of navigating at what point do I use them for, and to Sophie's point of like, defer to the experts, and then actually like, at what point can I kind of take over and, utilize my marketing background to kind of like make it more sustainable, acknowledging that the CAC is going to be higher up front. And then I have like a 50% return in customer rate. So people are coming back. But it's like, I need to acquire new customers outside of the Front Range in Colorado and outside of like, the West Coast, basically. So it's kind of determining that, but you're right that I understand that the return on investment should be as such that it makes sense to like, use the
you're
service.
right. If they're wanting sort of 6 months of close to $10,000 a month, right, between their fee and the expenses, that's a lot. You might be able to do better, and you should definitely try to negotiate, right? If you're talking to agencies that have these minimums and you're sort of a solopreneur startup, depending on where you're getting recommendations from, you might want to dig a little further, right? So I do agree with the trust thing, right? Like, am I aligned with this person? Are their references good? Do I get a good, feeling from them? But also, like, will they work with me as an early stage startup? Because, if they've got like a minimum package that's really high, it might be low for enterprise, but it's high for you, then maybe they're not. And I don't know that they're not, but I'm saying maybe they're not the right partner. Can you find somebody that's a little bit more flexible and that will kind of like what we talked about, right? Prove themselves through metrics, right? Do smaller tests and prove themselves through metrics, because, if they win business for you and that's profitable, then you'll happily give them more money, right?
Totally. Yeah. Well, I'm open to all the recommendations if y'all have any.
I'll
about
dig around.
specifically Facebook ads and Google ads.
Okay.
Definitely. With that said, I know we're coming up to time. As this is the first founder hour that we're doing this month, we'll be doing another one next month, which we'll send out an email. But if any of you founders are looking for either the advisor roles or the fractional roles, or even board members, please reach out to She's Independent, because we are here to support our founders in this ecosystem. So definitely we can help you, provide you with that sort of solutions or support in any way. So feel free to email us. And again, send us any topics that you want us to cover. I do want to say thank you to Sophie and Lisa for taking this time and giving us their amazing advice. We hope to see you again in this panel. And founders, again, we look forward to seeing you in the next one. And Natalie, always thank you so much for bringing this community together. And I'm super honored to collaborate with you.
We are so happy to have you. Thank you all. This was such a great discussion. Our first of many, events in partnership with Alex. So thanks again.
Thank you.
This was excellent. Thank
Thanks,
you. Really
everyone.
well done.
Thank you. Oh, wait, actually, if you want to come on video, if you're open to being in a picture, our marketing person loves this, and I love all the faces. So I'm going to do a capture in just 1 second. All right, ready? Oh, I love it. More people coming up. Yes. All right. All right. 3, 2, 1.
Good.
Thank you. What a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
It was a delight. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.